Well, here I have your book, which is like a Bible. I'm
Thank you.
sure you can see it. Okay, it's The Art of Brevity. Crafting a very short story. And it's really
Mhm.
smart because it's like so much of editing is like, oh my God, I didn't need all that shit.
True. I think writers are taught to write more throughout their lifetimes.
Mm.
And I think like one way writers prove themselves on the page, especially when we get insecure, as we all do, is to use more words and sometimes to use fancier words and kind of flex our writerly muscles when I think oftentimes the opposite is the way to be in service to the story and tell it well.
All the comfort sin can provide. Now, this came out kind of, you were already thinking about short stories, like or short brevity.
Yeah, so this one came out. So the first book, the book Fissures, which I'm not don't have with me now, but it came out in 2015, and that was the book of 100-word stories. And then this one, it's short stories, but not only flash fiction. So there's some more conventional length, longer short stories of like 15 or 20 pages or 10 pages, whatever, all different lengths. And this one was more, I'd been writing these short stories since I think the earliest one, I was probably 29, you
Mhm.
know? So they kind of span 30 plus years of my life, I guess.
Also, I'm so struck by how, um, I mean, this deals with sin, and it's kind of like you let yourself go. And there's this idea of, I mean, we've talked a lot about the author, the packaging versus the package, the
Hmm.
brand and all of that. And and there was a way sometimes when I was reading this and I was like, this is coming from Grant, like and it's like, yeah, we can imagine anything. We can, and it it doesn't mean anything, and
Hmm.
how was it for you to kind of allow yourself just to express whatever the fuck you wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting you say that because I mean, I naturally gravitate towards these topics because they interest me, because I think humans are messy creatures who do strange things to try to basically feel good and feel meaning in life. And some of those things are bad things, and that's just who we are. So I just generally like to kind of write more about the dark side of life. And but I remember like I talked to a friend once and he'd read my work for the first time and he was like, you're such a jolly, funny guy. Yet none of that jolliness or humor really showed up in the stories. And so I just think as authors we have different proclivities, different sides to ourselves. They don't necessarily have to match who we are generally in life. Like I think you can be a healthy, happy, funny person and also write about the darkness of human life and the sin, as you might call it. Um, so yeah, I just think we have so many different sides to ourselves, and it's just what interests me when I sit down to write is to write about somebody who's pushing the limits, or the boundaries.
As human beings, our imaginations can go fucking anywhere, and
Yeah,
people who try to legislate who we can be and how what we can do in our imaginations, but also then make the assumption that if you think it, that you are, or you're
right.
doing it, or you are it. And um
It's it's the dangerous part of being a writer or a creator, right? I mean, I hate it when people like doing it. People. I think especially if you're not a writer, I think they naturally kind of look for what might be your life that you're putting on the page, even though it's fiction. And I categorically, when that happens with my mind, and it happens naturally, I'll read somebody's novel and think, oh, this seems like their life, or this seems like this could have happened to them. But I kind of, I don't know, it's not fair. That's not fair. It's fiction. It's called fiction for a reason. And I think you have to interpret the story as a story, not as a part of the author's life. And after a while, what can you even set straight? It's an interesting thing because we want to be, and understood as human beings. I think it's really interesting how we want to be understood, how that's like a primary and just a deep drive, and how much it affects us negatively when we're not understood, you know?
Well, that
Um,
ties into your beautiful Substack. What's the name of your Substack?
oh, Intimations, a writer's discourse. It's the worst named Substack in
No,
terms of marketing.
I looked it up, intimations, and I looked and because I didn't know what it. Do you want to explain the?
Well, yeah, I should look it up. I mean, I have looked it up, and so I can't remember the precise dictionary definition, but it's sort of like, I don't know, just these. I mean, I like that because it sounds like the word intimate,
Yeah.
and I wanted a newsletter that was captured the intimacy of my thoughts, because that's been a primary goal of my writing, or a way that I find meaning in my writing is to search for, intimacy through it, through the words, my relationship to the words, but also hopefully the readers. And then intimations are just these little like hints. I guess there's like an uncertainty to them. And I'm not really into certainty. The word author goes with authoritarian, and I don't like to write with an authoritarian instinct or goal. And so I think intimations like captures that.
It does. And I was just very struck by what you wrote about what Jesus says, to on the cross, why have
Hmm.
you forsaken me? And sometimes writing, you're struggling kind of against yourself. I mean, you're the one you've put yourself on the cross. I mean, sometimes in some writing, there's a form of suffering to it. And and it feels like, why have you forsaken me? And it's like, well, who's forsaken whom? It's like,
Hmm.
um, and then the redemption, or the rebirth, I guess that's why for so many people, it's the idea, it's like telling people, write for yourself, write just to write. And that's always been for me, I'm writing with this idea of I'm writing for myself, but the idea of not having it out there in the world feels sort of like a stillborn, kind of like the redemption is being able to share it and not be alone with it.
It's a great way to put it, you know. Um, yeah, I mean, it's funny because we write to be read. We write for ourselves, obviously, and I do think that that's the best way to write.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's like we write to touch people, right, and to connect with them. I was working with a writer yesterday because I do editing and coaching on the side, and she's a relatively, new writer. And so she was just saying, I don't know much about writing. I don't know much about the craft, but I was in this workshop and people were touched by my story. And I was like, what more do you want as the definition of good writing than to touch other people and to have them tell you that you touched them? So who cares about all the craft at that point? You're doing something right.
So did she reach out to you because she wanted to learn the craft to make it even better?
Yeah, exactly. She wanted to learn the craft to make it even better and then get these like pieces published. So all about the next step. But if you've got that ability as a writer, I mean, as you know, it's like you're opening yourself up, right? You're making yourself vulnerable. I mean, you're doing it in a way that other people can access that. But that's something that's pretty hard to teach. I don't know if you can teach it. But it's fundamental. Like I always say, if you can write with vulnerability, nothing else really matters that much.
I mean, that's the thing when I'm writing, for me, I'm so involved in my own world, but then I think editing is where I start thinking of either the poor editor that's going to read it, or
Mm,
but also the audience, that
right.
like, and also it's interesting how times have changed, and there are things that I get to see my blindness, there are things that I have written, and it's kind of like when we were kids and we would say sit, we were told, sit Indian style.
Hmm. Right.
Now it's nothing you would say. It's
Right.
sit, crisscross applesauce or whatever,
That's the new one, yeah. Crisscross applesauce. That's the last one I heard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All kinds of things like that. And e even in drafts from not that long ago, I see things that it's like, wow, I didn't even I my unintentional blindness, you know?
Hmm. Right. Well, we all have that.
Do you talk to people about that when people come to you about writing?
About,
Well, if you spot something in someone's writing that you know is problematic, how do you deal with that?
yeah, I think it's definitely worth, I mean, not worth, I think you have to mention it, because um yeah, I mean, our language evolves, our way of seeing the world evolves culturally. That's marked by time and time period. Sometimes you can kind of be like, oh, well, that's the 90s or that's the 70s. It's not that you necessarily excuse it, but I think we have a heightened sensitivity, especially now, I think, to the way that using language can do harm to people, and so I think, like, as a writer, we want to be responsible creators and not inadvertently do harm to people by the way we might describe them or refer to them, or in other ways with language. So, yeah, I think it's just part of being a writer these days. Daniel Jose Older was just talking about this. He has this concept of the responsible creator. And so, yeah, I think we all need to be responsible creators.